Hello, welcome to BrainDrive Model Match. This is Navneet, and this video is going to be something special because in our previous videos, we used to discuss about top models on certain domains like email, therapy, summarization. But this video is specifically for those people who really want to know about Model Match, what it is, how to use it. Everything about Model Match is covered here. So, yeah, so if you're interested, let's get started. And before digging deep into model match, it is really important for you guys to understand the problem statement that led to the birth of model match. Okay, so the main problem I would say is that there are too many models. There are millions of models on Hugging Face, and it is really hard for an average guy to figure out which model he or she should be going with if he or she has a particular use case. Okay, so for example, if I'm a guy who wants to explore models on therapy, I might have to, go through benchmarks or maybe web searches or answers from any LLMs like ChatGPT or Grok. But let's be honest, for an average guy, it is really hard for them to figure out the benchmarks. And mostly the results from the web searches are subjective opinions, and we don't want subjective opinions. We need research back practical answers. Okay, not subjective opinions. That's not how it works. Okay, so people have zero clarity, benchmarks, it is too hard to understand, and that is how people waste weeks figuring out what model to use. And this is where model match comes. Okay, so our promise to the community is that we have clear recommendations. Okay, it's not just the recommendations, the evaluation framework that we designed to evaluate each and every model on a specific domain is properly researched back. Okay, so what do I mean by research back? The metrics and the rubrics that we integrate with the evaluation framework, open source evaluation framework, it is all research. We have taken references from the literature, tried and tested experiments, so that there is no subjective thought involved in it. Okay, everything is practical and already tried and tested out. Okay, so and it is also open source, so it is reproducible. So for example, if a person wants to test their own results, they can do it, and it is really simple to use. Okay, so this was about model match. Now let us understand how did we build each and every evaluation framework. So if you have been following us, you would know that we have total 5 domains. Okay, and we followed the same framework, or maybe I could say methodology, to build the evaluation frameworks. So the first is use case plus success criteria. Okay, so the first step is we need to define the success criterias. For example, if the evaluation framework is identifying this trait of the model, I could say that the evaluation framework is successful in recognizing the pros and the cons of the model, because ultimately what we are doing, we are evaluating a model. Okay, so first we need to make sure that the evaluation framework that we are building is right enough so that it can proceed evaluating or judging the model. Okay, so that was all about success criteria. Now our main question is, how do we figure out the success criteria? Okay, so the second step is defining rubric from literature. So I would say that if I'm building a therapy based open source evaluation framework, I need to figure out the metrics on which it would evaluate. It can be empathy, it can be tone, it can be relevance, lots of metrics. So we go through literature papers, we figure out the relationship between an advisor, patient, or a person, the impacts on it, and that is how we figure out maybe 6 to 7 metrics, as it depends upon the domain as well. Okay, so once we have the logic and the metric on which we can evaluate a model, then we proceed to the next step, that is building the evaluation prompts. So basically we build the logic in the form of prompts. We feed it to two not open source, two LLMs, that is GPT-4o and Claude 3.5 Sonnet. Okay, it does the evaluation, and once we have the results, we run it on a test set to make sure that everything is okay. And once we get metric wise score, so for example, if I have 6 scores, I'll get 6 scores and I will assign weights to it. Why do I do that? Because it is not always true that all the metrics are equally important for me. Okay, there might be situations that empathy might be more relevant to me than tone. So I will assign a weight of 0.9 to empathy and maybe a weight of 0.7 to tone. So we do weighted aggregation, and that is how the total score is calculated for one domain or one model, I would say that. Okay, so this was, all about how we build the open source evaluation framework, but let us take an example and understand this thing in detail. Okay, so let us take example of therapy because it is really famous. People are dealing with lots of problems. So okay, so as you could see, the first step is use case plus success criteria. So we figure out what are the use cases. Okay, why do people use therapy models to get therapeutic advices? That is one of the use case. Then maybe for research purposes, for literature purposes, there might be many use cases. So we list down the use cases in a chronological order and figure out what is the most important use case a person can use a model on therapy for. Okay, so it can be to, once we have the use case, then we have the success criteria, that is empathy, clarity, ethics. So this can be either subjective opinions, also web-based results, but we do not mainly consider these success criteria because 99% of our success criteria is based on the literature that we are going to talk next. Okay, so deriving the rubric or metric from literature, that is research papers. So for example, for therapy, we explore these research papers. We figure out the empathy as a predictor for client outcome. These are some of the examples. So for example, if I have a research paper which shows the impact of behavior by a therapeutic advisor on a patient, we can figure out whether clarity was the key holding metric, whether it was empathy, whether it was giving proper structuralized answers, etc. So there are multiple metrics, I would say. It totally depends upon domain. So we figure out what metrics to include in our open source evaluation framework using these research papers. Okay, not only the metrics, but how the calculations should be done and what is the importance of a metric for that open source evaluation framework. So if we figure out that empathy has more importance than tone, we will assign the weights in the future. Okay, so we first plan a proper flow. These are the 6 to 7 metrics. This is the importance. This is how we will calculate them. Because obviously it's not like we figure out the metrics and we just feed it to the judges. We need to actually design the rules and the conditions and the gates to make sure that it is not hallucinating or it is not evaluating on wrong basis. Okay, we need a structuralized prompt which follows rules, conditions, gates, logics, etc. Okay, so this was all about how do we figure out the metrics and the working of a domain based open source evaluation framework. Okay, so the next is building the evaluation prompts. Now that I have 6 to 7 metrics for therapy, let's say tone, empathy, relevance, uh, clarity, etc. Now the next step is actually creating this subjective data, not subjective, maybe contextual data into math based rules, because these are codes. Codes do not understand any kind of sentences that we give them. We need math based rules to actually create scores out of these metrics, right? So there are pretty much some rules and conditions, like if the empathy is between 7 to 10, or if there are 7 to 10 lines of empathy in that transcript, maybe the score can range between 6 to 7 out of 10. Just an example. The rules can be very detailed. I'm not going to cover that because obviously I have linked everything in the description section. You can check the documentation, it is really detailed. Okay, so this was all about how do we build evaluation prompts using literature. Then we have running test evaluation. So once we have the open source evaluation framework ready, the next is getting a test result out. So I would say that once I have the open source evaluation framework, my next step is figuring out what are the best open source models on therapy. Okay. So first is model selection. It is really easy. Go to Hugging Face, select top 20 models with most downloads, because that is what popular models are mostly. Okay. It can be fine-tuned models. Since this is a use case and domain-based application, it can also be a general purpose model. Okay. So once we have top 20 to 30 candidate models, we simulate a chat. Okay. So obviously we need to feed some kind of transcript to the open source evaluation framework. That is how it is going to judge the model, right? Okay, so we simulate a chat between the model and the human. Okay, it can be based on any problem statement. For example, if the human is suffering with depression or trauma or something like that, we take four subdomains on a specific domain. For example, therapy might hold four subdomains like depression, past trauma, job related or family related, relationships, etc. Okay. So once we have four variants for each, four variant conversation for each model, we assign scores to them by passing it to the Carlock evaluation. For therapy, we call it Carlock evaluation open source framework. Each open source evaluation framework for a domain has a separate name. Okay. So for therapy, it is Carlock evaluator. Okay. So we pass the transcripts to the Carlock evaluator. And once we get metrics wise score, we assign weights to it. As I have discussed in the previous slides, how weights are important. Okay. It basically tells us the importance of a particular metric in that evaluation framework. And once we normalize the scores in the range of 0 to 10, that is how we get the final score. So, for example, I am taking a model like Llama. Okay. I feed the transcript into Llama. Llama gets me six matrices. Okay. Not the Llama, open source framework gets me six matrices. And then evaluation framework actually applies weighted averaging, and I get a score of maybe 9.8 or 9.9 out of 10. Okay. That is not possible actually, but mostly the score is, I guess, 8 out of 10 or 9 out of 10 for therapy for the top three models that we have already discussed. So this was a, overall explanation with an example how it works. Okay. But you can check the documentation, of course, if you need detailed intuition and the math and the logic behind it. Okay. Now, this is again weighted scoring. First is we take the metrics, we normalize the score, because each metric may, give score in the range of, different ranges. I would say that if empathy can give in the range of 0 to 1, maybe tone can give in the range of 0 to 5, but we need a normalized range, right? We are only giving results in the range of 0 to 10. So we need to normalize it. Then we apply weights. Then we apply gates. Gates are basically rules. You could say that, for example, if I have 2 to 3 lines of hallucination in that transcript, I basically don't care about the score. I just want the score to be 0. Okay. So there are some extreme cases which is handled by gates. So this is one of the examples of gates. Okay. So once I apply gates, I get the total score. So that is how the entire evaluation works. Now, this is execution. It is really similar. So the previous slides I talked about is about how do we build the evaluation framework. Now, this is all about what happens in an evaluation framework. So the previous slides was about building, and this is about running. Okay. So first is information extraction. You get the input, then you apply some basic principles of NLP, like, maybe tokenization, splitting the sentences by words, figuring out the word counts, word length, etc. That is all handled by NLP. Then we have prompt evaluation, which is basically the prompts that we created using the building part. Okay. It passes the information through the prompt evaluator, that is the open source evaluation framework. Then we normalize the score, and then we apply weighted averaging. So this was all about execution. It is really simple. Okay. um, then we have per domain evaluation. Okay. So the idea behind, how each and every domain's open source evaluation framework works is very different. Okay. So therapy might have different logic, summarization might have different logic. The only commonality between all these domains is that they use two judges, that is Cloud 3.5 Sonnet and ChatGPT 4, and they use the, simple common techniques like score normalization, weighted averaging, prompts, etc. Okay. So you can actually find each of these in details in the documentation that I have linked in the description section. You can check it out later. Okay. So this is the official GitHub page. Okay. And these are the individual folders. We also have integrated eval. So for example, if you don't want to test these out one by one on each and every domain, you just want to push a model and figure out what is the score based on each domain. You can do it using integrated eval. It basically gives you score on the basis of 5 domains rather than metrics. Okay, you can find everything here. If you want the no code version as well, it is hosted on GitHub Spaces. You can pull this GitHub repo locally, and if you have your own API keys, you can test it out as well. It is really easy. Okay, so this was about per domain evaluation. It is, to be honest, very detailed. I have to spend another 20 minutes explaining each and everything. So let's keep this video short. Okay, and then we have top general purpose models using integrated eval. Okay, these are our top scorers. Okay, you can again check it out once the video ends. And yeah, this is our motto. Model match is equals to transparency, reproducibility, and ease. Okay, and everything is linked in the description section, so check it out once the video ends. It is really easy to use. Okay, use our open source evaluation framework, test your own results, let us know in the community section. This is our community section. Okay, we've been using it. It is really great. Okay, and ping us if you have any kinds of doubt. Okay, join the community at community.braindrive.ai, and until then, take care. Bye bye.